Welcome to XRP Pro Ledger, and today we are going deep on something that dropped just hours ago, and almost nobody in this community has had time to actually read it yet. The Senate Banking Committee released the full updated text of the Clarity Act today, all 309 pages of it, just hours before the scheduled May 14th markup session. And what is buried inside that document is not just regulatory language. It is the clearest confirmation yet that this bill is moving forward on a timeline that the market has not fully priced in. The markup is confirmed for Thursday, May 14th at 10:30 in the morning. That is less than 48 hours from right now. And I want you to stay with me through this entire breakdown, because at the 7-minute mark, I'm going to show you the on-chain numbers that tell you exactly what happens to a network already growing at 65% year over year, the moment the legal framework that unlocks full institutional deployment gets confirmed. And those numbers are not predictions, they are already happening. But before we get into what the document actually says, we need to understand why the timing of this release matters as much as the content itself. When a 309-page legislative draft drops the afternoon before a scheduled Senate committee vote, that is not an accident, that is a signal. Bills that are going to be delayed or killed do not get updated draft text released hours before markup. Bills that are going to be tabled do not get 309 pages of revised language dropped into the public record the day before the executive session. The release of this document today tells you something that the polymarket odds and the community speculation cannot. It tells you the people running this process believe it is moving forward, and the specific timing. A compressed release designed to give opponents minimal time to organize objections before the Thursday 10:30 session is exactly how legislation moves when the people pushing it are confident in the outcome. That is what most people miss today, not the content of the bill, but what the act of releasing it tells you about where this is heading. Now let us talk about what is actually inside those 309 pages, because this is where the story gets very specific for XRP holders. The Clarity Act does three things that matter directly to XRP. First, it codifies the separation between digital commodities and digital securities in federal law. XRP, with its payment infrastructure and utility-focused design, sits in the digital commodity category. This is not new information, but having it written into 309 pages of formally released legislative text that is hours away from a Senate committee vote is very different from having it exist as regulatory guidance that the next administration could reverse. And here is why that distinction matters more than most people realize. Regulatory guidance can be reversed by the next administration without a congressional vote. Regulatory guidance can be challenged in court. Regulatory guidance can be reinterpreted by a new SEC chair. Federal law cannot. Once the Clarity Act passes, XRP's commodity status is locked into the United States legal code, not subject to the political cycle, not subject to the next presidential administration, not subject to the opinion of whoever runs the SEC in 2028. That permanence is what institutional capital has been waiting for, not confirmation that XRP is safe today, confirmation that XRP is legally protected permanently. Second, it permanently shifts oversight of digital commodities from the SEC to the CFTC. This is the legal finality that institutional capital has been waiting for, not because institutions distrust XRP, but because institutional compliance departments cannot deploy capital at scale into assets with unresolved jurisdictional questions. The Clarity Act removes that question permanently. Third, and this is the detail most people are going to miss in the rush to cover the headline, the revised draft includes updated language on stablecoin frameworks that directly affects RLUSD's competitive position in the institutional market. The compromises in the new draft text are specifically designed to address the pushback from banking sector participants. And here is what that actually means. Banks do not negotiate the language of bills they are planning to ignore. Every single compromise in that 309-page document represents a banking institution writing the terms of its own entry into this ecosystem. The pushback is not opposition, it is participation. Now let us talk about something that most people in this community are getting completely wrong right now. XRP is trading at approximately $1.46. The price has been consolidating for weeks. The 309-page Clarity Act draft dropped today, and the price barely moved. And a large portion of this community is interpreting that as a negative signal. It is the opposite. Near the top of every market cycle, the social proof is everywhere. Green candles on every screen, news channels covering it, social media flooded with excitement. That excitement creates an emotional safety signal that tells the brain it is safe to act, because everyone else is acting. Right now, a 309-page bill confirming XRP as a digital commodity dropped hours before a Senate vote, and the retail market barely noticed. That is not weakness. That is the discount window staying open longer than it should. The institutions positioning into this move do not need social proof. They need legal clarity, and 309 pages of it just dropped today. Now let us talk about what is happening on the network, because the on-chain data connects directly to what dropped in Washington today. XRPL transaction volume surged 65% year over year, and the data is clear about what is driving that acceleration. RLUSD stablecoin activity is the primary engine behind that volume growth. Think about what that means structurally. A 65% year-over-year surge in XRPL transaction volume during a period when XRP price has been consolidating sideways, during a period when retail sentiment is quiet, during a period when the Clarity Act has not yet passed. This is not speculative volume. This is not retail trading activity driving those numbers. This is operational utility demand building on the XRP ledger in real time, before the legal framework that unlocks institutional deployment at full scale has even been confirmed. And here is what nobody is calculating right now, and this is what I promised you at the start. If XRPL transaction volume is already up 65% year over year on the infrastructure that exists today, what does that number look like 12 months after the Clarity Act passes and institutional compliance departments get the legal green light they have been waiting for? The answer is not complicated. A network growing at 65% annually before its primary legal catalyst, in an environment where institutional capital is legally restricted from deploying at full scale, is a network whose growth rate is being artificially suppressed by the regulatory uncertainty that 309 pages of legislation is about to remove. The network is already growing at 65% annually before the catalyst. The Clarity Act is the unlock. Now let us connect this to the supply picture, because the on-chain data adds another dimension to what today's legislative development means for price. Exchange reserves have dropped from 3.76 billion XRP to approximately 1.66 billion XRP since October 2025. That is a 57% decline in liquid exchange supply in under 8 months. To understand why that number is significant, you need to understand what it means in historical context. The last time exchange supply declined at a comparable pace was in the period leading into XRP's most significant price discovery event. The difference between then and now is structural. In previous cycles, the supply decline was driven by retail speculation and community excitement. What is driving the current 57% decline is institutional custody, ETF holdings, and long-term holder accumulation by entities that are not planning to sell at current prices. That is a fundamentally different supply compression. It is not emotional, it is structural. At the same time, US spot XRP ETFs recorded $25.8 million in net inflows on May 11th alone, the largest single-day inflow since January 5th. Total AUM across 7 ETFs now sits between $1.18 and $1.48 billion, holding approximately 860 million XRP tokens. Rising institutional demand through ETFs, meeting a liquid supply that has dropped 57% in 8 months, on a network whose transaction volume is growing 65% year over year. Hours before the legal framework that unlocks full institutional deployment goes to a Senate committee vote. These are not separate stories. They are the same story told from 4 different angles simultaneously. And this is where Standard Chartered's math becomes very relevant. Jeffrey Kendrick built his price models on 2 core assumptions: ETF inflows of $4 to $10 billion, and confirmed regulatory clarity. His structural targets are $2.80 by end of 2026, $12.60 by 2028, and $28 by 2030. ETF AUM is already approaching $1.5 billion and accelerating. Regulatory clarity is 48 hours away from its most important legislative milestone. Both of the core assumptions in Kendrick's model are converging simultaneously. And the 309-page document that dropped today is the clearest signal yet that the regulatory clarity assumption is about to be confirmed. Galaxy Digital's framework adds another dimension. Their analysis shows that capturing just 1% of Swift's $5 trillion daily payment volume would structurally justify an XRP price of $4 to $5. 3% Swift capture aligns with the $12.60 target. The Clarity Act is the legal foundation that makes Swift-level institutional volume deployment on the XRP ledger possible at scale. and 309 pages of it just dropped today. Now, I want to address something directly, because this community deserves a rational voice on what today actually means. David Schwartz, Ripple's CTO emeritus, has been consistent about one thing throughout all the speculation surrounding XRP. He has said clearly that conspiracy theories claiming something massive is secretly about to happen are almost always completely false. He has emphasized that Ripple's relationships are public. Escrow releases are scheduled and transparent, and standard NDA practice is not evidence of hidden government coordination. That rational framework is exactly the right lens for reading today's news. The 309-page Clarity Act draft is not a secret signal. It is a public document. The May 14th markup at 10:30 is not a hidden event. It is a scheduled Senate committee session. The bull case for XRP does not require secret deals or hidden mechanisms. It only requires you to look at what is already publicly confirmed. 65% year-over-year transaction volume growth. 57% decline in exchange liquid supply, 1.32 billion in cumulative ETF inflows, 309 pages of updated legislative text dropped hours before a confirmed Senate vote. Everything that matters is already in the public record, so let us zoom out and see the complete picture assembling right now on May 12, 2026. A 309-page Clarity Act draft dropped today. Markup confirmed for May 14th at 10:30. XRPL transaction volume up 65% year-over-year, driven by RLUSD. Exchange liquid supply down 57% since October. ETF inflows hit 25.8 million on May 11th alone. Total ETF AUM approaching 1.5 billion. Standard Chartered modeling $28 by 2030 on assumptions already being exceeded. In the banking sector, actively negotiating the language of its own entry through the compromise provisions in today's draft. The retail market is reading headlines and waiting for a reason to feel confident. The 309-page reason dropped today. May 14th is less than 48 hours away. If this analysis changed how you are thinking about the Clarity Act and what today's draft release actually signals, hit like and subscribe. I drop deep dive breakdowns like this twice a day to keep you ahead of the move.